They say accidents happen, but there was nothing accidental about the way my son's hands met my shoulders that day. "Stop making everything so difficult," he said through clenched teeth. And before I could answer, the world tilted, the floor rose up, and something deep inside my left hip screamed with a sound I'll never forget. It was sharp, bone against bone, a crack like lightning through wet wood. For a second I thought it was the chair that broke, or maybe the glass table I'd been gripping. But when I saw Michael's face, pale and shocked, I understood. It was me. I had split. He said, "Mom, I didn't mean to. Jesus, why did you move like that?" His voice already rewriting the moment. I remember the look, the way fear disguised itself as irritation, the way guilt rearranged itself into blame. I lay on the floor, one hand clutching the carpet, trying to breathe through the pain, and all I could think was how strange it felt to have the child you once held now standing above you, deciding whether or not to pick you up. They called the ambulance. He did, at least. I heard him on the phone, talking too fast, saying, "My mother fell," not, "I pushed her," just, "She fell." The paramedics arrived, strangers moving in efficient silence, their gloved hands lifting me onto the stretcher like a heavy package. I kept watching Michael's shoes. Polished leather, expensive, impersonal. They didn't move toward me once. The last thing I saw before the doors shut was his face in the doorway, smaller than I remembered, already turned away to answer his phone. He didn't follow the ambulance. He said he'd meet me at the hospital. He never did. The pain was enormous but strangely clean, like a tide that drowned everything else. They gave me something through a needle that burned going in and left my head cottony, detached. I drifted in and out, catching pieces of conversations. Compound fracture, someone said. Possible replacement. Does she have family? Her son's listed. I wanted to tell them not to bother calling him, but the words didn't reach my mouth. Somewhere inside me, I was still trying to forgive him. It's a reflex you never quite lose as a mother, the instinct to protect the very person who harms you, because you remember them smaller, lighter, needing you. I was 78 and still remembering my boy at 7, cheeks flushed from running home, holding up a crayon drawing that said, "I love you, Mommy." The body forgets pain faster than memory forgets tenderness. They kept me overnight in the trauma unit, bright lights that never dimmed, a television hanging from the ceiling playing something about real estate and perfect lives. Every few hours someone checked vitals, adjusted tubes, whispered to each other as if I were already gone. I stared at the metal rail of the bed, wondering how a life could fold down to this. White sheets, a plastic wristband, and the faint smell of disinfectant and defeat. A young doctor came in at dawn, crisp and tired. "Mrs. Leary," he said, glancing at his tablet. "You've had a hip fracture. We'll need to perform surgery tomorrow. Do you have someone we can contact for consent?" I told him my son would come. He nodded like he didn't believe me. He didn't come. By afternoon, a social worker with kind eyes and tired hands appeared instead. "Your son said he's out of town," she told me gently, as though that softened it. "Out of town, 20 minutes away. We'll proceed with your approval then," she added, and for the first time I realized the strange freedom in being abandoned. No one to decide for me, no one to correct me, just me, my broken bone, my broken trust. I signed the papers. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding the pen steady after so many years of being the one who signed for others. Field trips, mortgages, wedding checks, college forms. Now it was my own body I was authorizing for repair. The surgery blurred into a long tunnel of sleep and murmured voices. When I woke, the world had edges again. My leg was heavy, wrapped in bandages and metal. The room was different, quieter. There was a window with weak winter light and a vase of artificial flowers someone must have placed before realizing real ones were too much trouble. My throat hurt from the tube, my mouth dry. I pressed the call button, and eventually a nurse came in. Not the one who'd given me the injection earlier. A new one, tall, dark hair pulled into a knot, eyes that didn't dart away like most people's did. She smiled briefly, professional but soft. "How are we feeling today, Mrs. Leary?" she asked. I said I'd had better mornings. She laughed under her breath, not out of mockery, but recognition. "Let's get you some water." I watched her as she moved around the room, checking the monitor, tucking the blanket around my feet. There was something about her presence that quieted the noise in my head. Her voice had that low steadiness nurses sometimes develop from years of calming other people's pain. She reminded me of someone, though I couldn't place who. When she leaned over to adjust the IV line, I caught the faint scent of lavender soap, and for a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. My mother had used lavender water on my hair when I was a girl. The scent hit the oldest part of me, the part that still remembered belonging. I said, "That's a lovely smell," and she smiled again. "It helps me think straight," she said. "Otherwise, the place gets into your head." That night, the morphine wore off in uneven waves. Pain settled deep, old and personal, like something claiming its territory. I turned my head toward the window. Snow was falling outside, soft and disinterested. A nurse's shadow passed the door, slow and measured. Somewhere down the hall, a patient moaned for water. Hospitals at night are like train stations of the lost, everyone waiting for someone to come back or for the next stop to arrive. I thought of my house, the one Michael wanted to sell, and how the front steps would be slick with frost by now. I wondered if he had gone back there, if he was already calling realtors, already telling himself it was the practical thing to do. Practical. Such a tidy word for betrayal. I drifted between waking and half dreams. My son as a boy at the beach, running toward me with a seashell. My late husband, George, hammering nails into the porch railing, turning to grin at me. The baby I gave away 40 years ago, a face I'd never seen grown, only imagined in fragments. A curl of dark hair, a birthmark on the shoulder, the weight of her in my arms for 30 minutes before they took her. Sometimes I wondered if she ever thought of me, if she ever wondered whose eyes she had. I'd buried that story so deep it had become almost myth, a chapter I pretended belonged to someone else. But lying there, broken and unseen, I felt the old wound stirring, the silent companion of my life. Abandonment recognizes its own. It's an echo that never stops answering itself. The nurse returned around midnight to check my vitals. Her touch was gentle, confident. She adjusted the pillow under my neck and said, "Try to rest. You'll need your strength tomorrow." I nodded, too tired to speak. When she turned to leave, the faint light caught her face, the high curve of the cheekbone, the dimple that appeared when she pressed her lips together, the tilt of her chin. Something about it caught my breath. I closed my eyes and told myself it was the medication, the tricks of exhaustion. But the feeling stayed, strange and familiar at once, like the memory of a song you used to know all the words to. I thought of the old file in my desk at home, the one with the birth certificate I never looked at. June 12th, 1985. St. Margaret's Hospital. Baby girl. No father listed. No mother willing to be named. I tried to push it away, the idea too large and impossible to fit inside the night. But as the nurse walked out, humming softly to herself, I recognized the tune, a lullaby so old I'd forgotten I still knew it. The same lullaby I'd sung in that maternity ward 40 years ago, before signing the papers that erased me. My eyes opened wide in the dark, heart thudding against the frail cage of my ribs. I didn't move. I just listened until her footsteps faded down the corridor, and the sound of her humming dissolved into the steady rhythm of machines. That was the moment I knew the fall hadn't been the real breaking. It was only the beginning. The next morning, the world returned with the metallic taste of hospital air and the slow pulse of pain moving through my leg like a second heartbeat. I woke to the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the rhythmic footsteps of the cleaning staff in the corridor, each sound settling into my body as though I were becoming part of the machinery of this place. The nurse with the lavender soap, her name was on the chart now, Clara D., was not on shift. Instead, there was a man with tired eyes and too much confidence adjusting the tubes by my bed, talking to himself about dosage and efficiency. He didn't look at me when he spoke, just tapped the screen on the monitor and said something about progress. When he left, I felt the emptiness she'd left behind, a small hollow that shouldn't have mattered, but did. The doctor came mid-morning, holding a clipboard like a shield. He spoke of recovery plans, physiotherapy, transfer to a rehabilitation facility, pending family consent. The phrase made me smile bitterly. Family consent. What a polite way to describe power. I asked if my son had called. He checked his notes, frowned, and said there was no record of communication. "He'll come," I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I knew I didn't believe them. He didn't argue. Doctors rarely do when they sense a patient's faith breaking. They just move on to the next bed, to the next broken body that still has someone waiting in the lobby. By noon, the social worker reappeared, this time with papers in a folder stamped with the hospital's crest. She spoke in that slow, rehearsed way professionals use when they're afraid of sounding unkind. "Given your age and the nature of your injury, Mrs. Leary, we recommend a short-term stay at Rosehaven Rehabilitation Center. It's clean, modern, and your insurance covers part of it." I asked how long short-term meant. She hesitated, the kind of hesitation that contains years. "We'll evaluate after 3 months." I imagined 3 months of shared rooms, bingo nights, medication schedules, television news blaring for people who no longer cared what the world was doing. "I'd prefer to recover at home," I said. "My son can help." She glanced down at her file, then up again, pity softening her expression. "Your son expressed concern about you living alone. He said you've had forgetful episodes." The words landed like cold rain. Forgetful. A small word that erases decades of competence, that rewrites an entire person into a fragile caricature. I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my throat. "He said that?" "Yes," she said gently. He seemed very worried. I turned my face to the window to hide whatever passed through it. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, maybe all three, and said quietly, "He worries best when I'm not there." She left after key, making me sign another paper, this one acknowledging that I understood my options, though none of them were truly mine. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them like prayers. Somewhere down the hall, a television blared an afternoon game show, the laughter canned and mechanical. The sound of someone winning a prize they didn't need filled the corridor, mocking the rest of us who had nothing left to win. I thought about Michael's voice on the day of the fall, the sharpness in it, the way frustration had turned into something physical. We had been standing in the kitchen, sunlight slanting through the blinds, dust motes dancing like they were free. He'd come over unannounced, papers in hand, talking about arrangements. He said he'd found a buyer for the house. I told him I wasn't selling. He said it was too much for me, that I couldn't manage repairs, bills, snow shoveling, insurance. I said I'd managed everything in that house long before he was born. His jaw tightened. "You're being unreasonable," he said. "I'm trying to help." The word help. How men love that word when what they mean is control. I reached for the papers to read them, and he pulled them back too quickly. The movement was small, ordinary, like any tug of war between generations. But then his hand slipped, or maybe it didn't, and I lost my balance. The sound that followed was the sound of something ancient breaking, the illusion that I still had a place in his world. Now, lying in that bed, I realized he hadn't just pushed me physically. He'd pushed me out of my own life. While I was drifting under anesthesia, he had probably been sorting through my drawers, deciding what to keep and what to discard, telling himself it was all for my good. The thought was so vivid I almost smelled the lavender sachets I kept in the dresser, the ones that would end up in some donation bin by the weekend. I pressed my palms against the sheet, willing the anger to keep me warm. But anger, like morphine, dulls after a while. It leaves only the ache. The afternoon light began to fade, turning the room the color of weak tea. That was when Clara returned. She entered quietly, checking the chart, her hair pulled tighter this time, her movements precise. She didn't see me watching her. I asked if she'd been on break, and she nodded, saying something about double shifts and short staffing. "You should rest," she added, adjusting the curtain. "I don't rest easily," I said. "Never have." She smiled slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting as if she understood more than I said. "It's hard to rest when the world keeps taking things away from you." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she moved on to the next bed, leaving me with the echo of her words. Later, when the lights dimmed and the machines settled into their steady rhythm, I caught sight of her reflection in the window as she bent to write notes. The same curve of the neck, the same determined line of the shoulders. Something inside me stirred again, that impossible flicker of recognition. I told myself not to be foolish. She was young enough to be my granddaughter. But when she turned and our eyes met, just for a second, I saw a flicker there too. Confusion, maybe curiosity, like looking into a mirror that suddenly remembers you. She looked away quickly, muttered something about vitals, and left the room. An hour later, the social worker returned with more papers. "Your son's agreed to handle your finances while you recover," she said. "He's requested we transfer the billing information to him directly. It will make things easier." I asked to see the form, and she handed it over. His name neatly printed, mine reduced to a signature line. He had written, "Power of attorney for medical and financial decisions." The space for my consent was blank. "He said you'd be fine with it," she added. My hand trembled, but not from weakness. I looked at her and said, "I will sign nothing today." She nodded, her eyes flickering with something like respect, and gathered the papers back into her folder. "I'll note that," she said, and left me in the humming dark. When Clara returned at the end of her shift, she seemed more tired, the kind of tired that sinks into bone. She checked the monitor, replaced the IV bag, and was about to leave when I said quietly, "You remind me of someone." She looked up, wary but polite. "People say that sometimes," she said. "We all remind someone of someone else." "Not like this," I said. "You have a scar on your left wrist." Her eyes widened just slightly, her gaze dropping to the faint pale line near her pulse. "How did you—" she began, then stopped. I smiled faintly. I used to have one in the same place. It wasn't true. I'd made it up. I just wanted to see how she'd react. She pressed her lips together and said, "Try to rest, Mrs. Leary." But her voice trembled, just a fraction. After she left, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling until the shadows shifted and the first hint of morning crept through the blinds. I thought of my life laid out like the hallway outside, long, sterile, full of closed doors with names I no longer recognized. Somewhere among those names was my son, writing new definitions for me, reducing me to an inconvenience wrapped in legal language. But somewhere else, walking those same halls, was a woman whose lullaby still haunted the corners of my mind. I didn't know yet what she meant to me, or what I meant to her, only that our stories had collided at the precise moment mine seemed finished. Maybe that was fate's cruel joke, or its small mercy. By sunrise, the pain in my hip was almost bearable, but the pain in my chest had sharpened into something I couldn't name. Betrayal has a temperature. It starts cold, then burns slow, leaving ash behind where love used to live. As I watched the nurses change shifts, their voices blending into the mechanical rhythm of the ward, I realized that my fall wasn't the end of something. It was the catalyst, the strike that set every hidden fuse alight. The house, the son, the forgotten daughter, the years of quiet obedience. They were all waiting for this crack to open, for everything carefully buried to start surfacing again. I closed my eyes and whispered, not a prayer, but a promise. You can take my hip, but you will not take what's left of me. The days blurred after that, dissolving into one another like watercolor left in the rain. Hospitals have their own kind of time, a slow mechanical rhythm that erases the hours, making you forget that outside there are people eating breakfast, unlocking cars, living lives that still belong to them. I learned the sequence of sounds that ruled my new existence, the shuffle of carts, the hiss of oxygen valves, the distant laughter from the nurses' station that never reached this far down the hall. I could tell what hour it was not by a clock, but by the quality of the light spilling across the linoleum. Blue and brittle in the morning, then soft and syrupy by late afternoon, as though the sun were trying to apologize for something it couldn't fix. During those hours, I began to understand the slow cruelty of invisibility, how neglect is rarely violent. It's simply quiet, polite, and unrelenting. Michael still hadn't come. A week after surgery, I asked the nurse at the desk to call him. She tried 3 times, left a message the 4th, then returned with a sympathetic shrug that said more than words could. I told her not to bother again. I told myself he was busy, that guilt had turned to avoidance, that maybe he couldn't face what he'd done. But deep down, under the layers of excuses only mothers can invent, I knew the truth. It was easier for him not to see me. Easier to imagine that I was being taken care of, handled, managed, stored away. Easier to keep me in the realm of paperwork than in flesh and bone. Each morning they brought a tray of gray food with too much or too little salt. I ate mechanically, more out of defiance than hunger. The physical therapist came with a smile too wide to be real, urging me to move my leg, to lift, to push, to balance. "We need to get you on your feet soon," she said brightly, as though walking could repair what trust had shattered. My hip screamed when I tried, but the scream was honest. It reminded me I was still inside this body, still capable of resistance. I gripped the walker and made my slow laps around the ward, nodding to other patients who drifted past like ghosts in identical gowns. Some of them spoke, most didn't. The old man near the window hummed songs from another century. A woman with a bandaged face cried every evening at 6, the same time, as if the clock itself commanded her sorrow. Clara was assigned to me most days now. I tried not to watch her too closely, but I always knew when she was near. There was something about her silence. It wasn't absence, it was focus, like she'd learned that saying less meant surviving more. She handled me with a gentleness that wasn't pity. When she lifted my arm to check my pulse, her touch was steady, impersonal, but careful. She didn't rush. I told her once that I admired that kind of patience, and she said, "You learn it when you've had to wait for too many things." It was such a simple sentence, but it settled inside me like a key sliding into the right lock. One afternoon, she was helping me wash up, holding a plastic basin under my hands as I rinsed them. The light caught her hair, and for a moment the scent of lavender rose again, faint but insistent. I asked where she found it. "It's from my foster mother," she said without looking up. "She used to make her own soap. I guess I never stopped using it." Foster mother. The words hit me harder than they should have. I wanted to ask how long she'd been with her, what it was like, if she'd ever found her real one, but I bit my tongue. I had no right. And yet, when she looked up, there was a shadow in her expression that felt like recognition. Maybe it was nothing more than projection, but the way she smiled, half guarded, half tender, made me feel as though we were standing on opposite sides of a secret neither of us was ready to name. The social worker came again the next day with new papers. She spoke to me as if I were a child caught misbehaving. "Your son has requested an update. He's concerned about your ability to make financial decisions. He suggested we expedite the move to Rosehaven." I said no again, more firmly this time. "Mrs. Leary, he's only thinking of your safety," she insisted. "He's spoken to the administrator." "My safety isn't his concern," I interrupted. "It's my property." Her mouth tightened. "He's family. He's trying to help." I almost laughed. Help. The word had become poison. I told her I'd rather die in this bed than live in a place where everyone calls me by my room number. Her expression softened into the kind of sympathy people use when they've already decided you're doomed. That evening, Clara came in to change the sheets. She moved around the room quietly, efficient but distracted, her thoughts somewhere else. I asked if she was all right. She paused, hands gripping the edge of the bed linen, and said, "Some days are harder than others." She hesitated, then added, "My supervisor wants to transfer me to another ward. Says I'm getting too attached to some patients." I felt a jolt of panic I couldn't explain. "Will you go?" She shrugged. "If they tell me to." I wanted to ask her to stay, to tell her that the nights were colder when she wasn't there, but I swallowed the words. It would have sounded needy, and I'd been needy enough in my life. The following morning, I overheard two nurses talking outside my room. One said, "The old lady in 214, her son's trying to get her declared incompetent." The other replied, "Happens all the time. Families can't wait to get their hands on the house." I closed my eyes and lay still, breathing through the fury. Declared incompetent. 3 syllables that could erase a lifetime. It wasn't just about property. It was about voice, the right to say no and have it mean something. I realized then that the push in the kitchen had never stopped. It was still happening, just in slower motion. I was being shoved out of my own name. That night, Clara sat with me while the ward quieted. She'd brought a cup of tea. Real tea, not the colorless liquid from the machine. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing it to me with both hands. I took a sip and felt the warmth spread through my chest. "You're kind," I said. She shook her head. "Just doing my job." "No," I said. "I've had people do their job. It doesn't feel like this." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the chart at the foot of my bed, flipping through the pages. "Your file says you live alone," she said. "Yes." "No one else?" "Not anymore." She nodded slowly, as if committing the information to some private archive. "I used to wonder what that felt like," she said, "being alone." "You stop wondering after a while," I told her. "You just start listening to the quiet differently." For the first time, she smiled fully, not the professional half smile, but something unguarded, soft around the edges. Then she said quietly, "Do you believe people can meet twice in one life?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes," she said, "I look at someone and I feel like I've already known them long before I was supposed to." I didn't answer, afraid that anything I said might break the fragile air between us. She looked at me a moment longer, then stood. "You should sleep," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I watched her leave, her figure disappearing down the corridor, and for the first time since the fall, I felt tears rise, not from pain, but from the unbearable possibility that the universe was trying, in its twisted way, to give something back. The next day, I tried to move without assistance, stubbornness masquerading as progress. The therapist scolded me gently, told me I could tear the stitches. I told her I'd already been torn enough. She didn't know how to respond. Later, while she helped me back into bed, I saw Clara watching from the doorway, expression unreadable. After the therapist left, Clara came in and said, "You shouldn't push yourself like that." I smiled faintly. "I've been pushed worse." She sighed, sat on the edge of the bed, and said nothing for a long time. The air between us was thick with everything unsaid, 40 years of it. That evening, I found a small envelope on the tray beside my bed. Inside was a photograph of a newborn, hospital tag visible on her wrist, June 1985, written in neat cursive on the back. No note, just the photo. My hands trembled as I held it. I hadn't seen that face in nearly half a century, and yet it had been with me every day of my life. The nurse on night duty said Clara had left early, not feeling well. I hid the photograph under my pillow, afraid it would vanish if anyone else saw it. I didn't sleep. By morning, the photograph felt warm from my body heat, as if the paper itself had absorbed my pulse. I stared at it until the shift changed and Clara returned. When she entered, I saw the faintest hesitation in her step, a flicker of fear or hope. I wanted to hold up the photo to say, "I know," but I didn't. Instead, I just said, "Thank you for the tea last night." She nodded, eyes glistening in the fluorescent light. "You're welcome," she said. "You should keep it close." I didn't ask how she knew what I was referring to. We both knew. From that moment on, something shifted, not just between us, but within me. The hospital no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a crossroads. Outside these walls, my son was erasing me from documents, rewriting my story in ink I couldn't touch. But inside, something lost was stirring, something I'd buried under decades of obedience and regret. The world thought I was recovering from a broken hip, but what was really mending, slowly, painfully, was a fracture much older. I didn't know yet what to do with this new knowledge, whether to protect it or reveal it. All I knew was that the quiet cruelty of the ward had begun to lose its power, and that somewhere between the hum of machines and the rustle of paper gowns, my life had started to whisper back to me that I wasn't finished. I don't remember deciding to confront her. It wasn't one of those cinematic moments where revelation burns bright and the music swells. It was more like watching a tide creep closer each day until suddenly your feet are already wet. For nights I lay awake, the photograph pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, a trick of memory, a desperate woman clinging to fantasy. But the details refused to fade. The birth date, the city on her badge, the lullaby she hummed without knowing I was listening. Each fragment came together with the same inevitability as pain returning when the anesthesia wears off. I told myself that even if it were true, nothing good could come from saying it aloud. But silence has a weight that becomes unbearable once you know what it's hiding. It was early morning when I finally spoke. The ward was half asleep, nurses moving like ghosts between beds, machines sighing in their metallic rhythm. Clara was checking my chart, her hair loose for once, a few strands brushing her cheek. I waited until she turned toward me. "You were born in June, weren't you?" I asked quietly. She froze, pen hovering over the clipboard. "June 12th, 1985, St. Margaret's Hospital," I continued, my voice steady, though my chest felt like a drum. "That's a very specific question," she said, cautious now, defensive. "Why?" "Because I was there that day," I said, "in the maternity ward. I was there when a baby girl was born and taken away." She looked at me, really looked, and I saw her eyes darken, pupils widening like an animal caught between fight and flight. "You should rest, Mrs. Leary," she said briskly, turning back toward the chart. "You're still recovering. Sometimes medication can make people remember things that never happened." I reached for her wrist before she could step away, not hard, just enough to make her stop. "I remember everything," I said, "even the things I was told to forget." For a long time, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she set the clipboard down and sat in the chair beside my bed. "What exactly do you think you remember?" she asked. "A woman too young, too frightened, signing a paper she didn't want to sign," I said. "A baby with a tiny scar on her left wrist where the IV went in too deep. The nurse said it would fade. It didn't." Her hand trembled. "How would you know that?" "Because I saw it," I whispered. "Because I'm her mother." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was electric, the kind that hums before a storm. Clara's breathing quickened, her lips parted, but no words came. I thought she would stand and leave, call security, tell them I'd lost my mind. Instead, she leaned back in the chair and stared at the floor. "You can't just say something like that," she said finally, voice raw. "You can't drop it on someone in the middle of a shift." I wanted to apologize, but the truth wouldn't let me. "I didn't plan to," I said. "I've spent 40 years not saying it." "Why now?" she asked. I looked at her hands folded tightly in her lap, the same shape as mine, when I'm trying not to cry. "Because I broke," I said. "And when something breaks, everything inside it comes spilling out whether you want it to or not." She rose abruptly, pacing the small space between the bed and the curtain. "I don't know what you expect from me," she said. "A reunion? Forgiveness? You don't even know me." "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "I just wanted you to know I never forgot." Her shoulders stiffened. "That doesn't change anything. I had a life. I have parents. They're the ones who raised me." "Good," I said. "I wanted you to have a life. That's why I signed the paper." She turned toward me, eyes flashing. "And that makes it right?" "No," I said softly. "It just makes it survivable." The curtain stirred as a nurse walked by, humming faintly, unaware of the fault line running through our room. Clara rubbed her hands together, a nervous habit, and for the first time I noticed a ring on her right index finger, thin silver, plain. "I used to wear one just like that," I said. "I sold it to buy the train ticket to the adoption agency." She stopped moving. "Stop," she said. Please stop. You have every right to hate me, I said. I hated myself enough for both of us. She turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth, and for a moment I thought she would cry, but she didn't. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost calm. I found my birth records 2 years ago, she said. There was no name, just a note that said, Mother declined contact. I used to imagine what kind of woman could sign that line. Sometimes I made her cruel so I could stop wondering. Sometimes I made her kind so I could forgive her. I never thought she'd be lying in one of my hospital beds. I didn't know what to say to that. The truth felt too small for the size of her hurt. If it matters, I said quietly, I didn't decline. I was told not to. They said it would be better if I disappeared. Better for you, for the family who wanted you. She shook her head. There's always someone saying what's better for someone else. Yes, I said, and they're usually wrong. The intercom crackled overhead, announcing shift changes. Clara straightened, pulling herself back into her uniform, into the role that protected her. I need to go, she said. They'll notice if I'm gone too long. I understand, I said. She hesitated, then picked up the clipboard and started toward the door. Just before leaving, she paused and said, without turning around, You shouldn't have told me. Then she was gone. After she left, the air seemed thinner, as if the room itself were holding its breath. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, half expecting someone to come in and tell me she'd requested a transfer. I wouldn't have blamed her. I had upended her life as surely as I'd once given it away. But by evening, she returned. She didn't speak at first. She checked my IV, adjusted the blanket, wrote something in the chart. Only then did she say, I read your file. You're not supposed to, I said. I know, she replied, but I wanted to see who you were before this. She sat down again, not as a nurse now, but as something else, something unsure, searching. You were a teacher once, she said. I was. You worked at a clinic after your husband died. Yes. You lived in Oak Ridge until 1985. I nodded. She took a deep breath. My adoptive mother said my birth mother was young and poor. She said she did the right thing. I wasn't that young, I said, and poverty wasn't the reason. Shame was. She leaned back, closing her eyes as if trying to picture the woman I had been. I used to wonder if you ever thought about me. Every day, I said, every single one. Her eyes opened. Then why didn't you look for me? I hesitated. Because I didn't want to ruin what you had. Because I was afraid you'd hate me. Because I didn't believe I deserved to be found. The words hung between us, heavy and strange. Clara stared at me as though trying to see 40 years compressed into this one fragile body. I don't know what to do with this, she said finally. You don't have to do anything, I replied. Knowing is enough. For you, maybe, she said. For me, it's a hole I didn't know was there until you pointed to it. She stood up again, restless, pacing. I have a life, a husband, a daughter. They don't know about this. I don't even know what I feel. You don't have to feel anything for me, I said. Just live well. That's all I ever wanted. The sound of rain began tapping against the window. It was gentle at first, then steadier, as if the sky itself were trying to wash away the decades between us. Clara turned toward the sound, arms crossed, her silhouette framed in the thin light. You know what's strange? She said. I always loved the smell of rain. My mother used to say I got that from her side of the family, but she hated it. Maybe it came from you. Maybe, I said. Maybe we share more than we lost." She gave a small laugh, half disbelief, half relief. "You sound like someone who's spent a long time talking to ghosts." "I have," I said, "but you're the first one who answered." She stayed until her pager buzzed, signaling an emergency in another ward. Before leaving, she turned to me and said, "Don't tell anyone yet, please. I need time." "You have all the time you want," I said. "I've already waited 40 years. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain, my body aching, but my mind strangely quiet. For the first time since the fall, the pain in my hip felt like something other than punishment. It felt like proof that I was still here, still capable of breaking and mending, of losing and finding. The hospital room that had felt like a tomb now seemed like a waiting room for something unfinished. I didn't know if Claire would come back the next day or ever. But I knew this. She existed, she was alive, and she knew who I was. That alone was enough to make the walls of that sterile place feel less confining. I thought of Michael then, of how he had pushed me, not just physically, but out of the life he didn't want me in. For years, I'd mistaken his control for care, his distance for independence. But lying there, under the watch of machines and ghosts, I understood that the son who had abandoned me had made room for the daughter who had found me. Life rearranges its debts in strange ways. I didn't forgive him, not yet, but I stopped expecting him to be what he wasn't. There are many kinds of children, and some return only when you stop looking for them. As dawn crept in, the rain eased, leaving the air clean and the window streaked with light. The nurse on the early shift came in, surprised to find me awake. "You look better this morning," she said. I almost smiled. "I am," I said. "Something's begun to heal." She thought I meant my hip, but it was something else entirely, something that had been fractured far longer than bone. I had imagined, foolishly, that once the words were spoken between us, the world would slow down out of respect, that something as large as a buried daughter, finding her lost mother in a fluorescent hospital room, might impose a kind of sacred pause on all the lesser cruelties circling outside the door. Instead, everything sped up. News, demands, signatures, visits that weren't visits at all but inspections. It was as if my admitting the truth about Clara had signaled to the universe that I was finally awake enough to be tested properly. She kept her distance for a couple of days after our conversation, which I tried to grant her without bitterness. She came when duty required, checked my vitals, adjusted my pillow, but there was a new stiffness in her, a carefulness that hadn't been there before, like someone walking across thin ice trying to remember where it last cracked. She did not look at the corner of my pillow where I hid the photograph. She did not mention June 12th or St. Margaret's. I did not say the word daughter. We floated inside this fragile ceasefire, both pretending we didn't feel the shape of it pressing against our ribs. The first real blow came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of bland day you wouldn't save in your memory if not for what it carried. The social worker appeared again, not alone this time, but with a man in a gray suit and a laminated badge clipped to his lapel. His hair was thinning and carefully arranged to pretend it wasn't. His smile professional and empty, the kind that never touches the part of the face where honesty lives. "Mrs. Leary," the social worker began, her tone unusually formal. "This is Mr. Hargrove from Patient Advocacy and Family Services." An absurd pairing of words, I thought, as if advocacy and family were both departments that could be managed in adjacent offices. Hargrove nodded and pulled up a chair without waiting to be asked, sitting too close to the bed, close enough that I could smell his aftershave, some sharp chemical pretending to be cedar. I've been in contact with your son, he began, flipping open a folder that already had my name tabbed neatly. He's expressed significant concerns about your current capacity to make safe decisions regarding your medical care and living situation. The language had the polished feel of something rehearsed many times for many mothers who'd taken too long to die. I felt Clara before I saw her. She had come in quietly to check the IV, and then stilled when she heard my son's name, her body folding into a corner of the room like a witness who knew better than to announce herself. I met her eye for the briefest moment, then looked back at Hargrove. My son is concerned, I said, but not in the way you're implying. He gave a sympathetic tilt of his head. He tells us you've been confused, agitated, making unusual claims. We've documented a few. Something about long-lost relatives on staff. His glance slid almost lazily in Clara's direction, then back to me, as if measuring how far my sanity might have wandered. Heat climbed up my neck, not from shame, but from the precise violence of the insinuation. It would be so easy for them, I realized, to tuck this whole improbable truth into the file labeled cognitive decline, to turn a moment of raw recognition into evidence of delusion. One signature, one doctor's note, and every word out of my mouth could be neutralized. I am in pain, I said evenly, but I am not confused. Hargrove clasped his hands, a gesture of false patience. No one is saying you are incapable, Mrs. Leary. We're just exploring supports. Your son has initiated a petition for temporary guardianship so he can make timely decisions about your discharge and subsequent care. It's quite standard at your age. Standard, I repeated, tasting the word like metal. Clara moved a fraction closer to the bed, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. I haven't agreed to that, I said. The social worker shifted uncomfortably. The court can grant temporary status pending evaluation. Hargrove slid a form toward me on the tray, his pen already uncapped. If you sign here, we can avoid unnecessary legal proceedings and ensure your needs are met without delay. Your son is very devoted. He's worried about you going back home alone. I thought of Michael's hand on my shoulder, the shove, his voice rewriting the moment, even as I lay on the floor. I thought of the house he coveted, of the word help rolling off his tongue like a weapon. I didn't touch the pen. No, I said, I won't sign. He gave a little sigh that I'm sure he thought was inaudible, then put the pen down with exaggerated care. I understand this is difficult, he said. I'll leave these documents here. Perhaps you can think it over. I said no, I repeated, and this time my voice surprised even me, steady, low, as if it had finally remembered its original register. You can tell my son that if he wants control of my life, he can look me in the eye when he asks for it. The social worker tried to smooth things over, murmuring about options, evaluations, always that word, options, as if choosing between cages counted as freedom. They left with their folder and their aftershave and their unctuous concern, promising to revisit the conversation. Clara remained, one hand still resting lightly on the IV pole, knuckles white. You heard all that, I said when the door closed. She nodded. They do this more often than people know, she said quietly. Family calls, says the right keywords, confused, unsafe, impulsive, and suddenly no one has to listen to the patient anymore. Her voice was flat, but beneath it I heard something else, anger, and a trace of fear that I understood now was personal. Will you tell them I'm competent? I asked. It felt like too much to ask, but I asked anyway. She hesitated only a second. If they ask me for my professional assessment, she said, choosing her words with deliberate care. I will say you are oriented, articulate, and fully capable of understanding your own decisions. She met my gaze then. I don't sign lies. The next escalation came in the form of Michael himself, materializing 2 days later in the doorway like a man entering a meeting he was late for and already resented. He wore a navy suit and the face he keeps for bankers and neighbors, composed and slightly apologetic, as if burdened by the weight of all he provides. For a heartbeat, I saw my boy, sunburned nose, grass stains, peanut butter at the corner of his mouth. But the image faded quickly under the cologne and the careful haircut. "Mom," he said, stepping in, hands spread in a performance of warmth. "You look better." I watched his eyes flick over the machines, the chart, calculating. Clara was at the other end of the room, pretending to review supplies. She stiffened when she heard his voice. "You didn't come," I replied mildly. "I thought you'd gotten lost on the way to the phone." His smile faltered. "I've been handling everything," he said. "Insurance, the house, your situation. I've been under a lot of pressure." "From gravity?" I asked. "It does make pushing difficult." His jaw clenched. He came closer, lowering his voice. "Let's not start," he muttered. "I'm doing my best." There it was again, the poisoned phrase. I could feel Clara listening without turning her head, the air taut between the three of us. "You sent a man to have me sign my rights away," I said. "That's an interesting definition of your best." He sighed, heavy with rehearsed patience. "This is exactly what I told them about. You're being paranoid. They wanted to help us streamline decisions. I've been talking to a really respected elder care consultant. She thinks Rosehaven is the smartest move. It's 5-star. I've toured it. Is there a brochure?" I asked. "Is my name misspelled in it already? Or will you correct it after I'm sedated?" His cheeks flushed. He pulled a folder from his bag and slapped it onto the tray. "This isn't fair," he hissed, glancing at Clara now, annoyed she was still in the room. "Can we have some privacy?" She didn't move. "I'm on duty," she said calmly. "Anything related to the patient's care can be discussed in my presence." It was the first time I'd heard that tone from her, cool, impersonal, carrying the full quiet weight of her authority. Michael looked taken aback. "I didn't fall, Michael," I said, deciding in that instant that I would not let him continue to direct the narrative. "You pushed me. You were angry. You wanted my signature, and you didn't get it. Now you want to finish that job with different papers." For a flicker of a second, guilt flashed across his face, then vanished. "That's not what happened," he said sharply. "You stumbled. If you start telling people otherwise, they're going to think—" "What? That I'm confused?" I asked. "That I'm imagining your hands on my shoulders?" His mouth opened, closed. "You're twisting things," he said. "I came here to make sure you're safe and to fix this guardianship mess before it becomes a legal nightmare. If you'd just sign, none of this would be necessary." "I won't sign," I said. "Ever. If you want control, you can ask a judge to say I'm insane. You've already laid the groundwork." Clara's hand tightened around the rail at the foot of the bed. Michael scoffed. "You're being dramatic. Rosehaven would be better than that old house. You can't keep up with it. We can't keep coming over every time something breaks." "You haven't been coming over," I said. "Things break, and I fix them or live with them. That's how my life has always worked. But I see now it doesn't match your decor." He took a step closer, lowering his voice further. "Look, Mom, if you don't sign, the court might appoint a stranger. Is that what you want? A stranger? I'm your son. You can trust me." The irony was so sharp, I nearly inhaled it. "A stranger could hardly push me with more conviction," I said. Behind him, Clara made a small, involuntary sound, quickly muffled, and he spun around as if noticing her for the first time. "I asked for privacy," he snapped. She met his glare, unflinching. "And I informed you I am present as long as medical decisions are being discussed. If you'd like a private conversation, we can step into the hall and I can arrange a witness to ensure nothing inappropriate occurs." His jaw worked, astonished at being challenged by a woman in scrubs. "What's your name?" he demanded. "Clara," she said. "Nurse Delaney." The name hit him like a gnat he meant to swat away. He turned back to me. "Think about this," he said, jabbing a finger at the folder. "Rosehaven is the best option. I've already put down a deposit. You're making me look like the bad guy here when I'm just trying to do what's necessary." "Maybe stop doing what hurts," I suggested. Then the confusion about villains might clear up. He left angry, muttering that he'd let the lawyers handle it, which was the modern equivalent of a curse. As the door closed, the tension in the room uncoiled slowly. Clara exhaled and moved closer. "He can't do that without an evaluation," she said, though there wasn't much comfort in it. She'd seen enough to know how flexible systems become when money and convenience lean on them. "They believe him," I said. "He speaks their language. Responsible son, difficult mother. It writes itself." "Not entirely," she replied. "There are notes from staff." From me. That night, while the ward settled into its uneasy half-dark, she came back and pulled the curtain partially around my bed, shielding us from the corridor. She sat, not with the stiff posture of a nurse charting vitals, but slouched, elbows on her knees, like someone whose bones had carried too much. "I looked at the petition," she admitted quietly. "I'm not supposed to, but I did." He mentioned delusional content, specifically that you claim I'm related to you. Her voice shook on the last words, a tremor she tried to swallow. "He used that." I felt something inside my chest twist and harden. Of course he had. Of course he would reach that far, pull even the most fragile, sacred thread into his net if it helped. "I'm sorry," I said. "I never meant to cause trouble for you." She shook her head sharply. "This isn't about trouble. It's about whether what you said is real or just something you needed to be real." She took a breath, then another. "I called my mother. For a moment, I almost asked which one, but I knew. I asked her again about my adoption. She hates talking about it, but I pressed. She admitted there was a note in the file all those years ago. She lied when she told me there wasn't. She said it said no contact requested at this time, not declined forever, just that, and that the social worker had told her the birth mother cried so hard they had to sedate her. She never told me that part before." Clara looked up at me then, eyes shining with something furious and brittle. "So now I have you, saying you never forgot me, and I have her admitting she wasn't the only one who suffered. I feel like someone pulled the floor away." I reached for her hand, stopped halfway, unsure if I had the right. She closed the distance herself, her fingers cool against my paper-dry skin. "I don't know if I can ever call you mother," she said. "I don't know if that word belongs to us, but I know you're not crazy, and I won't let him use me as proof you are." The words slipped into me like stitches, rough but necessary. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand once and let go. "They'll probably schedule a competency evaluation," she said. "When they do, answer slowly, don't joke. Men like Hargrove don't understand women who use teeth in their sentences." The evaluation came 2 days later, a man with thin glasses and an overconfident degree asking me to count backward and remember 3 fruits. It would have been insulting if it weren't so transparently dangerous. I behaved. I named the date, the president, the hospital, the reason I was there, the medications I was on. I did not mention the scent of lavender or the way Clara's shoulders squared when Michael said the word guardianship. I listed the 3 fruits without flourish and did not make a single sharp remark. When he left, he nodded, an expression of mild disappointment on his face, as if he'd hoped I'd slip. Clara watched him go with barely masked contempt. "You did well," she said. "You sounded boring. That's what they think sane looks like." Later that afternoon, Michael called the nurse's station, demanding to know the result. Clara stood beside the phone, arms crossed, as the charged nurse replied that assessments would be shared with the appropriate parties in due course. "I'm the appropriate party," he snapped. "I'm her son." "She's the appropriate party," the nurse said evenly. "She's still her." I didn't hear the rest, but I saw Clara's shoulders loosen a fraction. Small resistances, but real ones. That night, as the sky outside the window turned the exhausted color of bruise, a quiet panic rippled through me. I realized that whether or not the court granted Michael what he wanted, he had already succeeded in something else. He had turned my existence into a case file, a disputed territory. My own life was being measured in signatures and assessments, and every word I spoke, every memory I claimed, could be put in the symptoms column if it inconvenienced someone's plan. It would have been easy then to retreat, to let the machinery roll over me, to let them wheel me into whatever polished prison had the softest sheets. But staring at the ceiling, I saw Clara's face when she said, "I won't let him use me." I saw the way the charge nurse had said, "She's still her." I heard my own voice telling Hargrove no. The real escalation was not Michael's petition or Hargrove's forms. It was this slow awakening inside me, this realization that the years I'd spent being grateful for crumbs had only trained the people around me to think I would eat anything. Breaking my hip had stripped away the illusion that keeping quiet kept anyone safe. He had pushed me, and then he had tried to erase the push. The world was prepared to believe him, because it is always prepared to believe the version where the older woman is confused, the son is noble, the nurse is just staff. But suddenly there was a new alignment, a small, stubborn constellation of witnesses and choices. My word, Clara's word, the fact that I'd passed their little fruit test, the knowledge of that tiny scar on her wrist. Sometime past midnight, Clara slipped in again, her steps light, her expression taut. She checked the monitors, then turned them slightly away from the door. "I shouldn't be here this long," she said, "but I wanted you to know. Your evaluation came back clean. No grounds for guardianship." Relief washed through me, not joy, but a grim validation. "He'll be furious," I said. "He already is," she replied. "He called 3 times. I didn't take the last one." She hesitated, then added, "They'll still push for rehab. They'll want you somewhere contained. You need to decide where you're going when they let you go." Let me go. The phrase struck me as odd, like I was something being released from impound. "I have my house," I said, "as long as he doesn't manage to sell it while I'm lying here." Clara's eyes hardened. "He can't sell it without your consent," she said. "Not legally." "Legal hasn't stopped people before," I replied. She considered me for a long moment. "If you want," she said slowly, "I can put a note in your file requesting a consult with a hospital legal liaison. Someone who doesn't work for your son, someone who can help you put things in writing, the right way." It was more than help. It was a line in the sand. "Yes," I said, "do that." She nodded. "I can't be part of that conversation," she added. "Conflict of interest." The ghost of a smile touched her mouth. But I can make sure it happens. As she turned to go, I said her name. She stopped, hand on the curtain. Whatever happens with us, I said, I need you to know this isn't me trying to drag you into my mistakes. It's me trying, for once, not to let someone else decide who I am. She looked back at me, eyes tired, and for a second there was something almost like pity there, but not the condescending kind, the kind that recognizes shared damage. Maybe, she said softly, that's the one thing you should have done a long time ago. Then she left, leaving me alone with the hard, necessary truth that the next move had to be mine. The woman from legal came the next morning, not in the predatory suit I'd expected, but in a simple navy dress with a cardigan, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. She introduced herself as Ms. Rivera, Hospital Counsel for Patient Rights, the phrase sounding almost fictional to my ears. I had lived long enough to know that rights was often the word they used right before taking something away. Clara had arranged it, I knew, though she was conspicuously not on my rotation that day, as if some invisible hand had decided we were to be separated until I proved I could stand on my own, even if only on paper. Ms. Rivera pulled the chair closer to my bed and laid a slim folder on the tray like it held either a weapon or a rescue line. I've reviewed the petition your son filed, she said, without unnecessary preamble. I've also seen your competency evaluation. As it stands, there are no legal grounds for guardianship. However, if you leave things as they are, he can keep trying. Or, she paused, and there was a spark in her eye I recognized, the glint of a woman who had seen too many men underestimate the elderly. You can choose to make some decisions now that will be very hard for him to undo. The morphine haze had thinned enough by then for my mind to move clearly, and in that clarity, something inside me straightened, the same stubborn piece that had refused to cry when my own mother was buried, the same piece that had walked into an adoption office decades ago and signed my heartbreak in blue ink because I believed, however wrongly, that it would save a child. Tell me what you recommend, I said, and for once I meant it without surrendering anything. She explained it calmly. I could draft a limited durable power of attorney, naming someone of my choosing, someone who was not Michael, to assist with logistics if needed, but with strict boundaries. I could sign a directive affirming my current capacity and explicitly revoking any implied consent to guardianship unless ordered by a court based on fresh, independent evaluation. I could record in writing my wish to retain my home, to return there, and to bar any sale or transfer without my notarized authorization. It was, in essence, a way of saying, I am here, I am lucid, and you will not move me like furniture while I'm still breathing. The thing that struck me hardest was how simple it all looked on paper, how a few short paragraphs could redraw the map of who belonged to whom. I don't have anyone, I started to say, thinking of the absence of trustworthy names, then stopped myself, because that wasn't entirely true anymore. I had someone who had already risked something for me, who had refused to lie even when it would have been easier. Can a professional stand in? I asked. Someone unrelated. Yes, Rivera said. We often recommend that. It calms things. Then I want that, I said. A stranger who is paid to protect my interests sounds more reliable than a son who treats me like a debt. She did not flinch at the harshness. Maybe she had a mother of her own somewhere. Or maybe she had seen this play out enough times to stop being surprised. She wrote as I spoke. I chose my words carefully, each sentence a stone placed where the bridge had been rotten. I stated that the fall was precipitated by physical contact during a dispute about property. I did not embellish. I did not dramatize. I simply refused to call it an accident. I stated that I intended to return to my home once medically cleared, and that any attempt to relocate me against my wishes would be contested. I signed the papers with a steadier hand than I'd expected. The pen felt heavier than it should have, but it moved across the page with the confidence I wished I'd had when I was young, and everyone told me what was better for me. Rivera notarized everything, her stamp landing with a soft, satisfying thud. I'll file copies with the hospital and send them to the court clerk and your primary care provider, she said, and to your son's attorney once he's officially on record. It won't stop him from being angry, but it will stop him from pretending you never had a say. I thanked her, and there was a thickness in my throat that embarrassed me, but she pretended not to see. At the door she paused and added, "For what it's worth, you are one of the clearest patients I've spoken to all week. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." When she left, I felt something I had not felt since before George died. Not safety exactly, but alignment, like my bones and my choices were finally inside the same body. Michael arrived an hour later, as if he could smell the ink drying. He didn't knock, just swept in, already mid-sentence about timelines and bed availability. When he saw the folder on my tray, his voice hitched. "What is this?" he demanded, snatching it up before I could stop him. He scanned the first page, color rising in his throat. "You went behind my back." The irony of that choice of words was so complete, I almost laughed. "I went in front of your plans," I said. "I clarified things." "You revoked my authority," he said, as if I'd spat on a family heirloom. "You never had it," I answered. "You just assumed." His grip tightened on the folder. "Do you have any idea how this makes me look? I've been telling people I'm handling things, and now—" "Yes," I interrupted. "That's the point. You won't be handling me." He hissed a breath between his teeth, glancing toward the open doorway, noticing the nurse passing by, aware of witnesses now. He lowered his voice. "Who put you up to this? That advocacy woman? One of these nurses? You're being manipulated, Mom. They love cases like you. Lonely old women with money and no sense." The hatred in his words was almost clinical. I let it land. It told me everything I needed to know. "That's enough," a voice said from the doorway, cool and level, and we both turned. Clara stood there, chart in hand, not entering yet, just marking the threshold. "If you have concerns about staff conduct, you can file a formal complaint," she continued. "In the meantime, you may not speak to her like that in this room. It's a medical space." He swung toward her, incredulous. "I wasn't talking to you." "No," she said, "but you're talking about her, and she's listening, and I'm responsible for her care right now. So I'm telling you the conversation is over." Something in her posture, in the way she claimed that authority without raising her voice, made him hesitate. He looked between us, suddenly unsure, as if realizing the axis had tilted and he was no longer at the center of the arrangement. "You think this piece of paper changes anything?" he muttered eventually, jabbing a finger at the documents. "You're still going to need me when you fall again, when you forget, when the bank starts calling." I thought of the life he'd built where I existed as a potential burden, a story to manage, a duty to resent. I felt a tiredness, but not the weak kind, the conclusive kind. "I don't need someone who pushes me and calls it help," I said. "I will hire strangers before I let you stand over another one of my signatures." His eyes flashed, but behind the anger there was something like panic, a small boy glimpsing for the first time that the parent might walk away. "So that's it?" he said. "You're freezing me out?" "No," I said. "I'm finally stepping out. If you want to see me, you come as my son, not my handler. and you remember what happened in that kitchen, whether you say it out loud or not. That's the only version I'm living in from now on. For a moment he looked as if he might argue, might shout, might let the mask slip entirely. But he didn't. He gathered the scraps of his composure like a dropped jacket, straightened, and said, "Fine, good luck." Then he left, the door swinging lightly shut behind him, as if the whole thing were nothing more than a minor scheduling conflict. When he was gone, Clara stepped fully into the room. There was a strange mixture on her face, triumph, dread, something tender she was trying hard to disguise. "Are you all right?" she asked. I exhaled slowly. "I think so," I said. "It feels like I just jumped off something high." She nodded. "You did." She glanced at the empty doorway. "He's not used to people saying no." "Neither was I admitted. "That's how we got here." She came closer, adjusting the blanket, an ordinary gesture freighted with all the unspoken history between us. "You understand he'll push back," she said. "He'll call, he'll guilt, he'll go through anyone who will listen." "I know," I said. "That's why I stopped leaving doors unlocked." She hesitated for a beat, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope folded once. "I wasn't sure when to give you this," she said. Inside was a photocopy of a form from long ago, the adoption file note. "Birth mother declines contact at this time. Displays acute distress." Someone, maybe Rivera, maybe Clara herself, had circled those last 3 words. "I requested my records again," Clara said. "I wanted to see it written. I thought if you were lying, it would show up somewhere." She met my eyes. "You weren't lying." My throat closed. Seeing my pain reduced to those 3 clinical words hurt, but it also vindicated something fundamental. I had not walked away easily. I had been torn. "I'm sorry they didn't let you know," I said. "I'm sorry they turned my fear into a permanent sentence." She pulled in a long breath. "I'm sorry I believed them when they said a woman who signs that line never looks back," she answered. Maybe we were both too willing to trust people who liked the sound of their own authority. There, in that unadorned exchange, something irreversible happened. Not a soft reunion, not a tearful absolution, but a quiet agreement that no one else would be allowed to narrate our story without our consent again. She sat down and, for the first time, did not place the chart between us like a shield. "So," she said, attempting a wry smile, "what are you going to do now that you've thrown a grenade into your son's plans?" I let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "I'm going to get strong enough to walk out of here on my own feet," I said. "I'm going to go home because I chose it, not because it's the only place left that will take me. And I'm going to talk to someone about putting my house in order before anyone else tries to grab it. Maybe I'll leave it in a trust. Maybe I'll carve out a corner for a scholarship. Maybe I'll leave a piece for a little girl who grew up to be a nurse with more spine than anyone expected." She blinked, startled. "Don't," she said automatically. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," I replied. "That's what makes the thought of it clean." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. When she left to answer a call, light down the hall, I lay back and felt the exhaustion roll through me, but beneath it, something solid. I had done it. I had written my own name where others had tried to erase it. I had refused the script that ends with the old woman grateful for whatever cage is offered. Michael could rage, scheme, hire men in gray suits. He could tell anyone who would listen that I'd been manipulated, that I was ungrateful, that I remembered things wrong. Let him. The documents were filed. The evaluation was clear. The nurse who knew the smell of lavender and the shape of my grief, had seen him, had heard him, had already decided which of us was untethered from the truth. There would be consequences, a cooling of what little relationship remained, a loneliness with sharper edges. But what I gained in that exchange was something I had not had for a very long time, maybe ever: sovereignty over myself. The fall had broken my hip. This was the moment I shattered the invisible harness I'd been wearing for decades. The sound of it was not loud, not cinematic. It was the soft, definitive click of a lock being turned from the inside. The hospital discharged me on a Thursday, a week before the first snow. The air outside felt thinner than I remembered, sharp enough to sting my throat, but I welcomed it like a long-lost ally. They offered to call a cab, but I refused. Clara had arranged everything quietly: my papers, my prescriptions, a visiting nurse for the first few days who wasn't her, but who understood enough to keep questions to herself. I was wheeled to the exit, and when the orderly stepped away to fetch a blanket, she appeared, her coat half-buttoned, a thermos of coffee in her hand. "You're really leaving," she said, her voice carrying that strange mixture of pride and worry that I had once reserved for Michael when he left for school on his own. I smiled, small but steady. "They couldn't keep me if they tried." She nodded, looked away toward the parking lot where breath hung in small clouds. "He won't give up," she murmured. "You know that." "Neither will I," I said. "But now he'll have to fight me in daylight." We didn't hug. It would have been too much, too soon. Instead, she poured a bit of coffee into the lid and handed it to me, her hands brushing mine briefly. "It's too hot," she said. "Give it a minute." "I've waited 40 years, I said. "I can wait another one." She laughed softly, eyes bright with unshed thoughts. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Leary." "You can call me Margaret," I said, surprising even myself. "If you want to." She hesitated, nodded, then whispered, "Goodbye, Margaret." The sound of my name in her voice was the gentlest closure I could have imagined. When she turned back toward the sliding doors, I watched her disappear into the building, a silhouette swallowed by the sterile light. I thought of how many times I had walked away from something I loved because I believed I wasn't allowed to claim it, and how, for once, I was leaving with my back straight, not bowed. The taxi ride home was slow, the roads damp and glittering. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror as if expecting a story, but I gave him none. When we reached the house, I half feared it would feel foreign, stripped of belonging by the weeks I'd been gone. Instead, it met me with its usual stubborn quiet. The key turned in the lock with the same click I'd heard for 30 years. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and lavender, faded sachets still doing their work from the dresser drawers. I stood in the doorway for a long time, leaning on my cane, letting the stillness settle around me like an old coat. The sunlight through the kitchen window caught the edge of the table where I had fallen, glinted briefly, and then moved on. I didn't look away. I placed my hand on that same spot, the grain of the wood smooth beneath my palm, and whispered, "I'm still here." The visiting nurse arrived that evening, a kind woman named Ruth, with tired eyes and a gentle humor. She checked the incision, changed the dressing, made tea, and left a list of exercises. "You're healing well," she said before leaving. "Strong bones." I nearly laughed. It wasn't strength in the bones that mattered anymore. It was strength in the will. After she left, I sat in the living room, surrounded by familiar objects that suddenly looked different, each one proof that I had built a life from nothing and managed somehow to keep it intact. The quiet no longer felt like abandonment. It felt earned. I poured the rest of Clara's coffee into my cup and sipped it cold, grateful for its bitterness. Over the next weeks, Michael called twice. The first time, his voice was tight, polite, asking if I needed anything. I said I was fine. He didn't ask about the papers or the house. The second call came late at night, slurred with either drink or regret. I couldn't tell. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "It just happened so fast." I listened, not forgiving, not condemning. "Some things don't just happen," I told him. "They're built over years." He didn't answer. After a moment, he said, "I hope you can take care of yourself." "I already am," I said. When the line went dead, I felt neither victory nor sorrow, only a quiet clarity. Some ties are meant to thin until they break, and sometimes that break is the only honest thing left between two people. Winter settled in. I walked slowly each morning to the end of the driveway and back, testing the new rhythm of my body, the ache in my hip, reminding me that healing and pain often share the same space. On the third week, I received a small envelope with hospital stationery. Inside was a note in neat handwriting. "The garden at the east entrance has snowdrops already. Thought you'd like to know. Take care, C." I placed it on the mantel beside the photograph of George and another small frame I hadn't touched in years, the baby picture I had carried through every move, every season of silence. Now the two images stood together for the first time, the past and the future sharing a single ledge. Sometimes I caught myself humming while I made tea, the same lullaby I'd once sung to no one. The sound didn't ache anymore. It simply existed, like breath. I thought about Clara often, but without the feverish longing of those hospital nights. She had her own world, her own family. What bound us now was not need but recognition, a mutual knowledge that love, once silenced, can still find a quieter voice. She wrote again in spring, just a postcard this time. "We planted lavender in the garden. It made me think of you." I kept it pinned to the fridge, not for sentiment, but as a reminder that even what's taken can return in another form. One afternoon, while sitting by the window, I saw the neighbor's granddaughter playing in the yard, her laughter sharp and free. Her grandmother called out, warning her not to run on the ice, and the girl shouted back, "I'm fine, I won't fall." I smiled at the sound. The words were defiant, unknowing, exactly as they should be at that age. I wanted to tell her, fall if you must. The point is getting up again. But I stayed quiet and let her joy fill the air. Now when the house creaks at night, it doesn't sound empty. It sounds alive, like it's breathing with me. I keep the porch light on later than I used to, not because I expect anyone, but because the glow comforts me. Maybe it tells some other lonely traveler that a woman inside this house still believes in returns, even unexpected ones. I don't pray anymore, not in the way I used to. My prayers have turned into statements of fact. I am here. I survived the fall. I remembered what was lost, and I named it. The rest is silence and peace, and a faint smell of lavender rising from somewhere unseen.